Hello everyone and welcome back to High Life on the High Line. You never know what I'm going to make a video about, so here we go for today. I am unwinding a hank of a DK weight colorway called I Don't Do Gray. I think it was from Close Up Knits. I forget the label, but it came from a place called the Knitted Otter somewhere in Indiana. My friend sent me this yarn for making some sleeping socks. However, I mistakenly told her that 100 grams was enough. I did not know yet that this weight yarn probably needed a whole nother skein. I was also making like a size 10 or 11 women's sock, so used very much of this yarn. This is the yarn swift I have. It's a little bit of a different kind. And if the hank is too long, it kind of drags. So I have it set up on a kitchen stool. It's all fine and well and good until you get a little going too fast and it starts to wind underneath the stool where the ball bearings are, because this is a swivel stool. Anyway, what I'm doing here, I've got the hank all placed on the swift. I cut off the ties that hold the yarn together, and I have a cardboard cone attached to a drill attachment. It's kind of a wedge-shaped rubber stopper, and it hooks into your drill. And you get it going at a safe speed, not too fast, you can wind your cone and get it ready for your CSM, your circular sock machine, and knit up a sock. One word of caution, don't go too low or too high on the cardboard cone, because it'll all come off and you'll have a mess, affectionately known as a yarn barf. I was going to edit out some of this, but we're almost at the end of this footage here. So bear with me and we'll move on to getting the sock started. Once you sit down at your machine, the first thing you will want to do is attach your cast-on bonnet, which is basically an open-ended sock on one end that has little loops to attach to your needles, and the bottom of it is just cinched up, and you can attach your clamps and weights to that. Here we go. This cast-on bonnet came with the machine. Some people make bonnets with split rings on them, which is basically a tiny little keychain, and then they put the metal ring over each needle. This bonnet is actually for a 72 needle machine, so actually I may be wrong about that. So I think I do every other needle. And work until I get as many as I can on, until I have to move the yarn carrier and finish the rest. Word to the wise, when you run out of needles sticking up, you have to put some yarn into the carrier and knit a few needles. Otherwise, you'll just unhook all the loops you just put on. I've done that several times incorrectly. That's how I know. So the yarn here is a waste yarn. That's what you put on first before you use your actual project yarn. And that enables the stitches to be held. Otherwise, your stitches would just run. It's the same thing basically as having them on a knitting needle or cable. Something to hold the stitches. And usually I do more yarn in the beginning than at the end of a project, and that's because I'm making sure all the needles are knitting and not dropping or skipping, and that the tension looks pretty good. So here I'm going to pull this waste yarn out of the yarn holder and put it in the middle. I'm actually now getting ready to put on a ravel cord, and that just makes it easier to separate the project from the waste yarn when it's time to take your project off of the machine. This is a braided fishing line, which has been well used since we got the machine in November, and I've been cutting the frayed ends bit by bit, and it's almost too short to use here. So this goes one round. I try not to overlap the edges, because then you gotta use your pick to get the stitches apart. It makes me think of a feed bag, and it's a potluck if you, whether or not you pick the right string, and it zips out easily. So now goes on this, I don't do gray yarn, and you can see how much thicker it is. And I will tell you here that I've already done this sock a few times and taken it apart again, so I did measure and write down the actual tension setting that I wanted to use. I believe right now I'm hanging the weights underneath. I just am not showing you that. I have a stack of weights, and I actually have them in a padded foam beer koozie so they don't fall off on my toe. Oh, I guess I forgot. I'm apparently monkeying with the tension knob. And here's something that is not intuitive, but if you want to loosen the tension, you turn it clockwise. If you want to tighten your tension, you turn it counterclockwise. I have taken to a different method on how I measure my tension. My accounting-minded sister would be proud of me. I made a spreadsheet, and what we've done is we've got how would you say it? An electric caliper that my boyfriend was actually using in his reloading shop, and I use that to measure from the top of that brass dial to the top of that screw, which is right in front of me in this picture. And I've been writing down the different kinds of yarn, the brands of yarn, any information I can take off of the label. And I write my tension setting. Basically, I'm measuring it in, I think, inches. So here I'm doing what's called hanging the hem. I made about 20 rounds, and now I'm pulling up the first stitch above the waste yarn, and that waste yarn is in dark blue, so it's pretty easy to tell what's dark blue and what is this actual sock yarn. And I'm using my picking tool to grab the purl bump of the stitch and bring it up onto each needle, all the way around until there's no more needles, and then you have to crank forward a little bit and finish, knowing full well that the first round after you hang this hem, you basically have a double width of yarn or double thickness of yarn on these needles. And so you do have to go slowly to make sure that every needle knits. And you don't have to go back and fix things. If I get a major mistake at this point, I would start over. Take it off the needles completely and start the project over. Did you hear that heavy sigh? I forgot to say you usually take the weights off when you do this, so you're able to pull up the inside of this sock and hang this hem. And many's a time where I forgot to put the weights back on after I finished, and you wonder what's going wrong until you realize all the stitches start to fly off. Big mess. And I definitely start over when that happens. When you bail out, basically you have to take the yarn out of the carrier, the yarn carrier, the brass piece that holds the yarn coming from the mast at the top. Because if no yarn is going into the needles, it basically releases every needle and then your project comes off. I hold on to the weights when I do that, or take off the weights and just pull down tightly. There's been times where I couldn't even do that correctly and I had to drag it up from the inside and pull it off needle by needle. I really hate to cut that yarn unless I have to. So I must have skipped over where I did the whole cuff, and I probably did 70, maybe 70 rows of knitting, and now I have started the heel. To do the heel, basically you lift up half of the stitches, excuse me, not stitches, needles. You lift up half of the needles and you're knitting the needles that are down. Those are called needles in work, and those are the ones in front of me. I just grabbed some heel weights and I have to stick them in the project near the stitches that I'm working. So the yarn is being pulled down and doesn't tend to creep up off of the needles. And so basically when you start this, you are going to pull up one needle on the same side as your yarn. See, I'm doing that now. I'm going to pull up a needle on the same side my yarn was and crank around to the other side. I'm always checking my stitches and making sure they're not riding up. And I go down to, in this sock, I think I only went down to 18 needles. So I would have started at 32 and gone down to 18 instead of 16. I wanted a little bit of a wider heel at the bottom since this was a pretty big sized sock. When you crank your carrier around, or your carriage, I don't know exactly what you call it, but you'll hear kind of a special click at the end. And if you start coming back around and your yarn is hanging loose and you're like, what? Why is this happening? Usually it's because you didn't quite go far enough and get that extra special click. And once you run your machine enough, you'll be able to listen for it. And if I'm talking to a friend or I get a phone call in the middle of a sock, in the middle of a heel or a toe, I don't want to talk to you. does not work well, and I tend to just make mistakes. Maybe you can hear that little click at the end. I'm counting needles. So I finished the first half of the heel, which would be called the heel decrease, and now I'm doing the heel increase. So basically you're coming back out the half, the second half of the heel, which in this case would be the part going towards your foot. And here you are pushing a needle down opposite the side where this yarn is. There are many different methods to do this. At this point, I have done just the one down method going from side to side. Some people do one up, two down, or one down, two up. I'm not sure. I did that in the beginning, and they say it's to avoid having holes at the corner of your heels, but that didn't seem to work for me, so I actually learned to wrap the last few stitches at the corner of the heels, and if they don't look good, I actually darn them closed when I'm finished my sock. And that would be when it's in my lap while I'm doing the handwork to close the toe. This yarn was pretty thick, and it was almost pushing the limits of this machine. I know it says it's a DK weight, but I was thinking it was almost worsted weight or thicker. So here basically I'm pushing a needle down back into work. One side, then the other side, and back and forth until I am back to my original number of needles in work when I started the heel in the first place. And the trick here is when you get back to that point to not crank your machine past the middle, which would be right in front of where I'm sitting, because you need to then put the rest of the needles down, and if you crank it too far, then you're not able to put those needles down. Hopefully I'll do that right here in just a little bit. I must be fixing a drop stitch, which could take a while, so maybe I better skip a little. Maybe I was wrapping and not actually fixing stitches, but I have a feeling I was fixing stitches. It's been a while now since I made this sock, so I'm really not sure what problem I'm having. This here looks like a skipped stitch. In that case, you have to pull the one where it skipped. You got to pull the stitch underneath it up and over the needle to lock in the one that got skipped. My biggest difficulty with fixing dropped stitches before they run is, number one, to remember to take the weights off so you can try to catch the stitch before it runs down 4 or 5. And then you actually have to fix it from the inside. Otherwise, you'll have the knits on the wrong side and the purls on the wrong side. And I have to tell you, sometimes I'm lazy, and if it's just a sock for me and it doesn't have to be perfect, I just fix it the easiest way I can, even if a few stitches look wrong. I just care that they don't run like a pair of pantyhose. All right, here I'm almost back to half and half. I'm still putting one needle down opposite side of the yarn. I'm taking a lot of care with this thick yarn to make sure that it's not coming off these needles. Because when you do the heel, it gets much tighter than the regular tension in the rest of the sock. I guess I have another one to go yet. And another one. That thing hanging around my neck is a Christmas present Louis got me. It's kind of like a reading lamp. I really liked it, except for the fact that it used batteries and was not rechargeable. Okay, I was smart enough to remember this time to stop the carrier right in front of me, and I'm lowering the needles. And as you can see, I'm also fiddling with them to make sure that the latches are open, because it's a disaster if you have a closed latch. Nobody wants to restart a sock when they're more than halfway done. But I can assure you I've done it many times. Slow going, making sure every needle is knitting. I believe I just also took off the heel spring. You must have the heel spring engaged when you're working a heel and a toe. Some people like to leave the heel spring on for a tighter fabric, a tighter weave of the fabric, all the way through the entire sock. There is also something called a half weight, a half heel weight. And I bought one, but I haven't used it yet. I'm not exactly sure its application and if it's enough weight to do the heel and the toe, because I don't think it's easy to interchange on the machine. So one way you know your tension is good, so I'm cranking and cranking here towards the toe. So this would be the foot part of the sock. So as I go around, those needles drop and the yarn drops right back to the top of that aluminum cylinder at the base of the needle. If it doesn't drop down quickly as you're cranking, when you come around on the next crank, you're going to get all jumbled up. Here I'm measuring basically down to the heel to see how big my foot needs to be. I asked my friend to measure her foot from the back of her heel to the tip of her toe, so I had an idea. I think they ended up being a little bit long, but since they really are just for sleeping, I'm not worried about, you know, the fit of it inside of a shoe. These are 100% wool, merino wool. There is no polyamide in these, no lycra, nothing that's going to help it keep a shape. So she will probably have to block these or put them out on a towel after she hand washes them. I do not believe this is a superwash yarn. As I go and do these projects, I do have to write down how many rows for the hung hem, how many for the cuff, how many for the foot. If I made a deep heel, extra needles down on the heel, and then how many needles I went down to for the point of the heel, because you want to make your second sock to match the first. That's the intention anyway. I think I'm getting close to being able to do the toe here. So when that comes, I'm stopping that carrier right in front of me. And then it's time to start the toe. It's just like a heel. Oh, I guess I have to measure again. Let me skip ahead. In case you were wondering, there is a counter on the machine. More measuring. So the tool in my hand is basically used to lift up a bunch of needles at one time. It's called a crescent tool. And so I lifted up 16 of the needles. The 16 closest to me will be the ones actually being knitted. So we call those the needles in work. And I'm cranking to the back, and just like the heel, I'm going to raise one needle up on the same side as the yarn. And I always go down to 16 needles on the toe. I don't change it like I do sometimes for a heel. You don't want to go all the way down because you don't want it to go to a complete point. And one thing I don't think I did for this sock, because I didn't know it yet, but I've been learning how to round out the toe a little bit instead of it being so angled on the sides. Here I am adding my heel weights. Again, that's to keep the fabric closest to me where those needles are down, with a downward pull, because otherwise the fabric tends to want to go more straight across, and these weights will help keep the needles tight down on the bottom, keep the stitches tight down to the bottom of the needles. There are 3 of them, and they're pretty pokey.
Can I come in my house?
He must have known I was videoing him asking if he can come in his own house. What a goofball. Counting my needles, trying to get down to 16. Pulling a needle up on the same side of the yarn. That is for the decrease of the toe. Still going. Checking my stitches, counting my needles.
Can I,
Must be pretty tight. Looks like I'm holding them down to make sure I pass okay. Oh, I think I'm fiddling with the heel weights. I'm readjusting them. Every so often you've got to bring them in closer as you're going down and spread them out further as you're doing your increase. So I'm doing my increase now. I'm putting a needle down on the opposite side of the yarn. Checking my stitches, pushing a needle down, but not all the way down. If you put it too far down, you might force the latch to close and then you'll be dropping stitches. So I put it about 2/3 of the way down and it'll work. Again, with this one, you're working your way back out to 16 needles up and 16 needles down. And you've got to remember to stop your carrier right in front of you, which if it's a clock, it would be the 6 o'clock position, so that you give yourself a chance to put all the needles down back into work. And right at the end of the toe, you have to actually pull in your project yarn, add your waste yarn, and then put all the needles down, and that's it. You crank some waste yarn and then you take it off the machine. That's the best part. I don't know if you can see the blue paint on the cylinder. That's basically your halfway point. All the needles behind it are half. So 16 behind, 16 in front of the blue. Here I'm getting all those needles put down, making sure the latches are open. And then I'll be cranking the carrier to about the 3 o'clock position. I'm going to leave a long enough tail so that I can sew the toe closed. Usually I cut it right by the cone, so there's plenty. And then you will be pulling that yarn into the middle, tucking it in. That's what I'm doing now. This yarn carrier is slotted. The one it came with is not slotted, and I was happy to find this in my package without having to purchase it separately. It does make things a lot easier. So there, I've tucked that yarn in. And now when I add this project yarn, I need to back up a few needles so that we don't miss any and drop any stitches. So as you can see, I went back behind that sock yarn a little bit. Maybe just a needle or two. I was trying to get it in the latch there. Yeah, my latch must be closed, so I'm trying to fish it through and make sure it gets knitted. And there we go. So this is dark blue. It's a very contrast color to the mostly white yarn, so that when I sew the toe closed using the Kitchener stitch, I can see which one is which. Going nice and slow, making sure all the latches are closed and catching. I should say open and catching. And again, this is to hold those stitches so they don't unravel on you or run. And now I'm going to take the yarn out, drop it into the middle. Well, I didn't drop it in the middle, I just ran till I ran out of it. Hold on to the weights and crank it off. And so here is my sock. I'm taking out the heel weight. This is a second sock. It's a much finer yarn, also 100% merino. Purple variegated yarn. I used a pink yarn for the waist yarn. You can see the cast on bonnet is already down in there. And this is not a full video on this one, but you can see the color difference and the yarn is much thinner. These socks are for the same person, and there was enough yarn in this skein to make her 2 socks. They came out
Time
very
to hang
pretty.
the hem.
Here's just a little recap and the finished product at the end. Still have to sew the toe closed on that one. This is me giving her a color suggestion when I made the first one too short. And this is the longer sock. All finished. It's pretty long. And there is the purple one. Happy knitting!